Pacers win an ugly one against the Brooklyn Nets. They're over 500. What? They're sixth in the East. What? Tyrese Haliburton was good. Ben Mathurin was good. The Pacers got some stuff to clean up, though. We'll break it all down today and talk some James Johnson on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Tuesday and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, much to discuss from Pacers Nets. A fun one. Sorta. Pretty ugly, but the Pacers had a nice surge early, comfortable lead for most of the game, so fun-ish experience for viewing for them. Not so fun in terms of good basketball. Pretty ugly game. Lots of missed shots, lots of yuck. Lots of yuck. The Nets available players group was not very strong, but the Pacers got it done. They deserve credit for winning. They're over 500. They're sixth in the East. I can't even believe this is all something I'm saying because the last time the Pacers played in Brooklyn, yuck. So we'll talk about the game, what happened, how the Pacers overcame the opposite of the style they've been playing recently, and James Johnson. He's staying. His contract's getting guaranteed. We'll talk about that and what it means for the Pacers. Ugly win. 113.99 for the Pacers in Brooklyn. Nets scored 99 last time the Pacers were in Brooklyn, but the Pacers only scored 90. This is not a good win for the Pacers. If you looked at who the Nets had available for this game, their starting five was Zaire Williams, Noah Clowney, Nick Claxton, Tyrese Martin, and Keon Johnson. Their available five bench players were Jalen Wilson, Day'Ron Sharpe, Tosan Abowan, Reese Beekman, and Dariq Whitehead. That's the Nets available players in this game, and the Pacers were losing at times in the first quarter, and it got within single digits in the second half. If that's all true, this is not a win that anyone is going to be like, yes, the Pacers did it. But I tweeted the injury report yesterday because it was super long. D'Angelo Russell, Ben Simmons, among the Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, among the good players out for this game, right? And every fan, or even non-fans, were applying, well, loss for the Pacers. That's the rep they've built and earned deservedly for games like this, right? Funnily enough, the Nets started it. The first time I remember this really being a thing was that game where they came to Indy forever ago. No KD, no Kyrie, no Harden. They sat like everybody, and they won. People wrote all these think pieces about, oh, how this is terrible for fans, blah, 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 and it was. And then they won, and Alize Johnson had this crazy game, and and ever since then, even this season, the Hornets game in Indy, where the Hornets had some guys out, Raptors had guys out for one of the Pacers' losses this year. The Pacers have built this rep of seemingly inferior opponents missing players. They would lose the game, and fans get used to that, and they have the reactions that they do. So to be clear, I still think the win is not impressive. They did not beat a team that should have been difficult for them to beat, but this is a sign of some small amount of progress for the Pacers in that they actually won a game where they played bad, an ugly win. I think the only other one they had all season was fittingly the first time they went over 500. They beat Detroit opening night, and they had a great fourth quarter, and Tyrese Haliburton hit a dagger. But for much of that game, they played pretty bad, and the rest of their games this season have required them to at least do something of competence or look good for extended stretches to actually win. I guess that stretch they had the 3-game homestand where they beat Washington, New Orleans, and Portland, where they played pretty rough for all three of those games and snuck out wins. Those were home games. I would say this was the second or third time this season that the Pacers played a rough game but found a way to win. And again, this sounds like obvious stuff that good teams do, but the Pacers haven't done that. They've been no problem against great teams or good teams, but this kind of game has been tough for them. And this one wasn't. So I actually think this is maybe something for the Pacers in the progress department. Maturity. They adjusted throughout the game, right? Their early game plague, which we'll talk about in just a second, they fixed for a while and then went away from it and got back to focusing on it. And they adjusted to a slow start from the starters and everything was hunky-dory. So on paper, no one's impressed by this. If anyone digs deeper than the paper and looks at the box score, actually watches the game, they'll probably be even less impressed, honestly. The Pacers did not play well in this game, but they found a way to win. And that is what good teams do, is on nights they play bad, even against bad teams, they can still win. And that has not been the case for the Pacers this season with the earlier Brooklyn loss, Toronto twice, Charlotte twice, the Philly game at home with no Embiid or Paul George, the Magic game with no Banchero. I mean, you can go on and on down the list. So I spent 5 minutes monologuing on why, yes, not an impressive result, and yet still meaningful in some ways for this team. How did the Pacers actually win? Really interesting style game this one was. It reminded me a little bit of the first Pacers-Boston game we just saw, in that, if you remember, I said before the game and after it, the Pacers were going to pull that upset because it was a back-to-back. They just lost to OKC. They were going to have to do one of two things: have the three-point variance be really in their favor, or just dominate the effort part of the game, crush the glass, get every loose ball and stuff like that. The Nets aren't good enough at shooting, especially with the group they had available to do the first part and win the variance battle. So it was going to be effort. And lo and behold, early in the game, and this really continued all night, but the first quarter especially so, the Nets were unbelievably good on the offensive glass. They had 7 offensive rebounds in the first quarter. I believe Daron Sharp had 4 of them by himself. They had, the first time I tweeted their second chance points, they had 10. I believe they finished the first quarter with more than that. By the end of the night, the Nets had 20 offensive rebounds. That sounds bad. I'll talk about that in more detail in a second. 20 offensive rebounds, 33 second chance points. Pacers had 8, right? If you've been listening to this podcast of late or watching the Pacers of late, you know that a big part of the Pacers' turnaround and their ability to win some of these games that, have been impressive wins, Phoenix and Miami this calendar year, the thing that they've done really well, and they talked about this after beating the Suns over the weekend, is the possession game, right? And they have very similar stats in both those games. Against Miami, the Pacers only had 8 turnovers, and they had 13 offensive rebounds. Against the Suns, against Phoenix, Pacers had 8 turnovers and 13 offensive rebounds, right? That's a low turnover number and a very healthy offensive rebound number. Meanwhile, the Heat had 16 turnovers. The Suns had 13. And both of them only had 5 offensive rebounds. So the Pacers gained a ton of ground in the possession battle with that. I'm not going to rehash the possession battle argument because I've done it several times already this week because of how the Pacers have played. But the Pacers, like I've said, took 21 more shots than the Heat. They took 19 more shots than the Suns. That's a good way to win, right? That's going to help. That gives you so much, or 18 more shots than the Suns. It gives you so much margin for error. You can miss more, and lots of things cannot go your way, and you can still win. In this game, the opposite happened. The Pacers almost lost because of that. And I put this in my notes, is that, what I said against the Suns was, at halftime it was tied in that Pacers-Suns game. I promise this is a Nets take. And I said, I think the Pacers are going to win because the way they're playing, this low turnover style, this possession game style, is in theory more sustainable. They're generating good shots. They just have to make them. Whereas the Suns were making a lot of tough shots, but we're playing a style that, was kind of high variance. Lo and behold, second half starts. Suns miss a few more shots than they made in the first half. Pacers style holds, and they won. In this game, I thought, man, if the Nets keep hitting the glass like this, they might win. They missed a lot of shots early in this game. Really, they missed a lot of shots the whole game. They picked things up in the second half. I think after the first quarter, the Nets were shooting like 34.8% or something. So I wondered, if the Nets keep this up, they're going to win. And they kind of did. They had 7 offensive rebounds in the first quarter. They finished the game with 20 offensive rebounds. That's a ton. That is tied for the most the Pacers have given up in a game this season. You might be surprised to know the Pacers are 3-2 in games they give up over 15 offensive rebounds this year. So I say that I don't say this to say that they did as good. I say this to say sometimes, not always, sometimes a game where an opponent is getting a ton of offensive rebounds is an indicator that they're not making anything, right? They can't make shots, so they have to get offensive rebounds, and that was certainly the case in this game. So while the Pacers still did not do well rebounding for the rest of the night, they did better. Only, air quotes, only 13 offensive rebounds across the final 3 quarters for the Nets, and the Nets had 14 turnovers, whereas the Pacers only had 10. So early, while it looked like the Nets could run away with this possession battle part of the game and make this a grind for the Pacers got back to playing the way they wanted. They didn't turn it over very much, and that is how they turned this game around. They kept the Nets off the glass. Parts of the third quarter, Daron Sharp got going on the glass again, a little bit in the fourth quarter. He was a monster. He had more offensive rebounds than the Pacers by himself. Tyrese Martin had an okay rebounding game, but in general, not enough for the Nets there to keep up. TJ McConnell hit a buzzer beater late in the first, or right before the buzzer of the first quarter shot that put the Pacers up 2. They were never trailing again, right? Once they tied it up late in the first quarter, figured out that possession stuff, they led the whole way. And the key separating factor in the end was free throws. So I thought this was a good call out from Rick Carlisle after the game. once the Pacers cleaned that up, they just had to find a way to actually separate themselves, and it was the foul line, right? The Nets made more shots than the Pacers. Now, granted, I just talked about the possession battle. The Nets took 19 more shots. They made one more. They were pretty inaccurate, but they made more shots than the Pacers in this game, 41-40. The three-point battle was 12-10, very close, right? If you make one more two, but you make two less threes, okay, it's going to be a close game. But the free throw battle was so much in the Pacers' favor. Pacers were 21-23, Nets were 7 for 11. That is 14 points. Guess how many the Pacers won by, right? Rick Carlisle called out that the Pacers did a good job getting in the bonus early in quarters tonight. They did that often. A lot of that was Haliburton. Some of it was Siakam. Those two took 14 free throws, just those two. But that was the deciding factor. So many other things were close in this game, and the Nets dominated a lot of effort stuff. That could have been an ugly game, but the Pacers had a reliable source of offense at the free throw line because of their drives, because of the way they played. And that is how they won an ugly game. They found a way to solve their earlier problems. They figured out a way to score on a night they weren't really hitting shots that well early. They figured out a way to overcome taking 19 less shots than their opponent. They got it done. 3-0 in 2025, winning record. Let's talk about some individual performers in this game, good and bad. Thomas Bryant, maybe his best game as a Pacer. Tyrese Haliburton, good again. Ben Mathurin, still getting praise from Rick Carlisle. So much more to talk about coming up right here on Locked On Pacers. Before we get to any of that, though, we need to talk about the great people over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. They're coming right up. My Vikings, the 5th seed. They were so close to the 1. And right now, if you're a new customer over on FanDuel, you can bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose on that $5 bet, you get those bonus bets. And the FanDuel app gives you everything you need to have fun with all that. The live bets, the same game parlays, and so much more. Stuff that everybody loves, like your spreads or your over-unders or your first touchdown score. Visit FanDuel and check out everything. Get started with $200 in bonus bets on FanDuel.com. That's where you can join today. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, Locked On Nets. Hear about the other side of this game. The Nets are in a treaded military vehicle mode, it would appear. Cam Johnson did not play among many players. So you can hear about trade rumors with Cam Johnson and how bad the Nets are playing. Speaking of Cam Johnson, I talked about him yesterday, why he's good and he would fit the Pacers, but also why a trade is extremely challenging to put together. I mentioned TJ McConnell's salary when I was doing that because I was just reading through a list of player names who are in the medium Pacer salary tier. Reminder, he cannot be traded this year. He was extended in August, and his trade restriction from that extension is after the trade deadline. So TJ McConnell cannot be traded this year. And I would also remind you that if there's going to be a Cam Johnson trade, Obi Toppin, because he also has incentives, likely has to be in it. Keep that in mind as you put stuff together. But there are other ways to do it. Either way, not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the Pacers win over Cam Johnson's team, the Brooklyn Nets. Nobody was awesome in this game. A lot of guys were really good or did a lot of stuff really well. I think one of the key moments of this game was a huge stretch for Ben Mathurin in the second quarter. But, I mean, the Nets had, no spacing, and that let the Pacers get some stops and run sometimes, so they could just kind of end runs at any point. And they had some moments where they were shooting hot and some they weren't. It was just not really a pretty game for the Pacers, who couldn't really get a run. The standout stretch from a player was Ben Mathurin in the second quarter. He had 9 points that quarter, 4 for 4 from the field, and made his only 3, and had an assist. And it was all in a flash. It happened so fast, right? And the thing that changed to me in the second quarter, really for the Pacers as a team and what they were focused on, was they were getting to the rim way more. And all of a sudden, Mathurin was a big part of that. He hit the 19-foot, pull up in the lane. Right after a Nets mate cut it to 7, he got it back to 9. Then he hit a floater about a minute and a half later that got the Pacers lead back to 9. Then 2 possessions later, he hit a 3. Then the very next possession, he hit a layup. The Nets were actually playing okay in the stretch and hitting their own shots. Mathurin kept them away. He was crucial in that stretch. And then he assisted Haliburton's corner 3 to get the Pacers lead back to 14 just before halftime. Nice read, right? He was driving from the corner. Tyrese Haliburton filled in behind him, got it back to the shooter, right? Good stuff for Mathurin in that quarter. His best quarter of the game, and another good game for him. 20 points for Ben Mathurin, their second leading scorer in this game. Only 3 rebounds. That's actually a low number for him now. But he hit 57% of his shots. He made 3 threes. He keeps defending well. And Rick Carlisle keeps talking about it. I've noticed it since they played Philly last month in their first home game of the NBA Cup. But Mathurin just continues to make the fit in plays. And that's very good for the Pacers, right? That's what it's always been about with him is fit. And if he's blending who he can be with who the Pacers need him to be, he's at his best and the Pacers are at their best. He's had so many games of late where his plus-minus leads the team. That happening again today. He was plus 16. Nobody had like a hard defensive matchup, but he defended ball handlers. He went 8 for 14. He had a crucial stretch when the Nets were getting warm in the middle of the second quarter. Really good Ben Mathurin game. Carlisle keeps singling him out in a good way after these performances about how well he's playing and what it's meant for the Pacers. And clearly he's responding to these things. And the quietest 20 points, right? That's a good thing. Very good game from Ben Mathurin. Haliburton was great also. And for him, it was the free throws. 9 for 9 from the foul line in this game. That covers over. A 5 for 12 from the field night for Haliburton. 1 for 5 on twos, right? He was attacking the rim a lot. He took 5 twos. But 9 free throws really shows that. He was drawing the contact around the basket quite a bit. Could have had 15 free throws if he got the foul call he's been trying to get all season where he burps up a shot when he gets contact about 15 feet out. Some refs give it to him, some refs don't. Tonight was a don't game, but he still got 9 free throws up. 23 and 8 for Tyrese Haliburton. 3 turnovers. Pacers had a few more turnovers than they've had in recent games in this one, but that's how you cover up a 5 for 12 night is 9 free throws and making every single one. So two of the starting backcourt players for the Pacers were awesome in this game in Haliburton and Mathurin. They were the leading scorers. They had efficient moments. They were doing something that the Nets could not contain. And while the Pacers really did not play the way they usually do when they look their best, right? Only 22 assists, not great in the possession battle, only took 31 threes. A lot of stuff that suggests, hey, this might have been a pretty ugly game for the Pacers. Instead, they found ways to win, and a lot of that was paint pressure, right? Haliburton was getting to the basket, drawing fouls. Ben Mathurin at his best in this game was getting to the basket. That sets the tone for everybody else. It makes everybody else's life a lot easier. Pascal Siakam was pretty good in this game. He's had good games in Brooklyn before, but they didn't need him very much. He only played 23 minutes, 24 minutes, in this game. It was interesting that in the first quarter, they took him out when they normally do, but he didn't come back in, right? He usually comes back in with the second unit. Thomas Bryant came in, and I thought that was my first thought was, oh, this is going to be Thomas Bryant playing a little more for Turner because Turner has this calf thing, and the Pacers played a center the whole game, right? Every single minute of the game, one of Bryant or Turner was on the floor. So they split the power forward minutes like normal. It could have just been 50-50, but there was garbage time at the end. Furphy fills up about 3 minutes there. Either way, only 24 minutes for Siakam. He still played fine, 19, 6, and 2. But they ran the rotation a little different at the 4. Obi was good. Obi Toppin was good off the bench, 4 for 6 with his 11 points and 5 boards. But I thought that was very interesting, the way they handled that. And I wondered if it would be a Turner thing. But it ended up that Thomas Bryant played pretty well. And Myles Turner played very well defensively. 6 stocks for Myles Turner, plus his 10 points. Not a good rebounding night for Myles Turner. Day'Ron Sharpe did great on the glass. Nick Claxton's only real contributions in this game were on the glass. But Turner's defense covered up a lot of that. But not that Siakam didn't play. He didn't deserve the minutes. He deserves more minutes every game. He's been the Pacers' best player this season. But just interesting front court rotation decisions because the Nets had nobody who could really guard Siakam in this game size-wise. I mean, Clowney, I guess, was the best option. Zaire Williams is too small. Nick Claxton's on a big. Everybody off the bench is either a center or a guard for the Nets. So Siakam had lots of advantages, but just wasn't as involved as some other games. Didn't really matter that much for the Pacers in this game. Toppin, like I said, was good off the bench. McConnell made shots, 3 for 4. That's something that has not been there for him of late, but the bench was in particular not awesome in this game, but Thomas Bryant was. This felt like one of his most effective games as a Pacer, despite not having the stats. You just felt his presence at the rim, especially on defense in this game. He was 3 for 4 with the made 3. He had 3 boards, 2 assists, a block, no turnovers, +1 for a bench group that had a lot of guys not in the positives. I thought Thomas Bryant was really good. When they need to rely on him for more than 15 minutes, I think the Pacers are just kind of hoping he makes shots or jumpers, and he did in this game. So nobody was exceptional. Nobody had like I have to lead talking about how this guy got the Pacers past to the Nets. But a lot of guys were good enough, and a lot of groups figured something out at exactly the right time, like Thomas Bryant coming in and making plays, or TJ McConnell hitting a shot at the end of the first quarter, or Toppin with some monster dunks, or Haliburton getting to the line. Nembhard, I think all 3 of his made shots were in the final quarter. They just had just enough all night, and they kept a Nets very, very banged up Nets team away. And then late, James Johnson came in, 1:36 for James Johnson, his 6th game of the season, moved the ball around the perimeter. He was the de facto point guard for that group. This is really my segue into talking about him because news of his contract decision has been made. What does that decision entail? What does that actually mean for the Pacers? And what does it mean going forward? Well, you're about to find out here on Locked On Pacers. Before we do that, though, got to talk to you guys about Prizepicks. Basketball season is heating up. There's no better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with Prizepicks. Whether you're a diehard fan or just love some friendly competition, Prizepicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. Here's how it works. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. LeBron, more than or less than 30 points. Luka, more than or less than 8 assists when he returns. Prizepicks lets you make your predictions, put money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. You can use it all season long. You could pick Jason Tatum last week for more than 29 points. You'd be happy. If you picked Anthony Edwards for more than 25 points when he had 53 against the Pistons, you'd be thrilled. That's the kind of action you can get. And with Prizepicks flex play option, even if one of your picks doesn't hit, you can double your money. Plus, once you hit, you get your money fast, sometimes as quick as 15 minutes. Best way to keep the game exciting. Now's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. That's on Prizepicks. Run your game. We're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. Your second listen, 3 recommendations. 1, Locked On Suns, because they might be imploding, and they benched Bradley Beal, and it went awesome. He was great against the Sixers. And then either Locked On Heat or Locked On Kings, both because those teams have some juicy subplots going on, although the Kings, since their juicy subplot started, are 5-1 and playing very well. But they played a great double overtime game. That game, Heat blow a 17-point lead. That's how the Pacers got to 6th in the East, is that exact loss. Both of those shows will be great. Let's keep it rolling here on Locked On Pacers. The last contract deadline before the trade deadline for the Pacers was or is today. It's this Tuesday when this episode comes out, the 7th. So technically it's the 10th. What happens on January 10th is, I don't want to over-explain this because I've talked about this on a podcast already. If you're on a contract that is either non or partially guaranteed and you're still on the roster that you're on January 10th, congrats. Your contract is now fully guaranteed. And so the only player on the Pacers this matters for is James Johnson, who had a $750,000 guarantee in his contract this season. He passed that mark. He's already has a cap hit higher than that now. But the Pacers could have saved, if they waived him on Tuesday, wrong tab, Tony, there you go, about $1.1 million against the tax. Open up some flexibility. Open up a roster spot. So they'd have been able to use 10 days or convert a player. And they could still do that stuff later in the season, I suppose. But such is life for them. This is the decision they had to make. Do they want James Johnson? Do they want to be able to have that flexibility? Dustin Dopirak went to Brooklyn. Thank you, Dustin, for being the best. He asked Rick Carlisle about this deadline. So the reason it's actually the 7th is the deadline, this Tuesday, instead of the 10th, is you have to clear waivers by the 10th for your contract to be removed from the books and not be guaranteed. Waivers takes 2 days, so you have to be waived by the 7th. You clear on the 9th, you're not on a team on the 10th, right? So that's why the deadline is today. Dustin asked Rick Carlisle about it. He said he's not going anywhere. We need him. And I followed up with people. James Johnson is staying with the Pacers. His contract will not be waived. He'll be fully guaranteed by the end of Tuesday. So the Pacers will not get those savings from him. They'll keep him in that 15th roster spot. They're under the tax still. That's totally fine. They lose a little bit of flexibility. But what's more valuable to them? Flexibility or James Johnson, right? And the same question always comes up. Feels like I'm talking in circles a lot, of people who say, well, they should use that roster spot for someone who can play. Okay, who can play? Who is this mystical free agent on early January who can play in a rotation right now? I understand the argument of sign a young player who has potential. I get that. But again, if someone was really great with potential, they would also be on a team. It's not that there's not guys with potential. It's just the reality. But clearly the Pacers love him, right? They've signed him to 7 or 8 contracts since they originally signed him in 2022, right? And very well received by his teammates year in and year out. And the other thing people love to say is, he should be a coach, not playing, blah, blah, blah. I think there is something to the reality of them going through it with you as a player. It's easier to listen to their voice and understand that they're going through the struggle with you. They sit through film with you. They did training camp with you. They do the running with you. They can complain about stuff with you. Like, I think that's realer. I think that hits harder, right? So it's a different dynamic than a coach. And they've loved him for years. They keep doing this because they like him so much. So this year, I think things were a little different than past years where the flexibility mattered more than in the past 2 seasons because they're so close to the tax, because they have the Paris trip option that I talked about a few weeks ago. But all that's a lot of hoopity hoopla when you could just keep a guy that clearly you value a lot. I did say I would have understood if they waived him because they could have done some creative 10-day stuff because of their Paris trip. But I did think that staying was the most likely option because what can you do? What can you do better with the spot than this? Something that clearly provides a lot of value to you, and he's making the lowest amount of salary he can possibly make. So I thought he would stay, and he is. He's going to. So his cap hit's now the minimum for the rest of the season, just over $2 million is that cap hit for James Johnson, who played in this game. Again, his 6th time of the season. So with that locked in, I'm assuming we'll see some other cuts around the league. Not that anyone cares about this, but I think probably you'll see Bruno Fernando cut by the Raptors. The Kings will probably cut somebody. Who knows? Jake Crowder, Doug McDermott, Orlando Robinson stand out. Maybe some other vets get cut. And the Thunder, I think they have a backup center. Carlson's his name. I bet he gets cut too. We'll see. I am just guessing a little bit based on teams' cap situations. Either way, Johnson sticking. So Pacers at 15 guys. The reason this matters a little bit for future thinking is they have no flexibility versus the tax, right? It's hard to make trades. They can't basically take back more money in trades than they send out unless it's almost even, like within 100,000 without going into the tax. And it's just part of the reality they have in their current situation, right? The cap barely went up and they re-signed a bunch of guys, but it's harder to make trades and it's harder to add someone later in the season or convert a two-way. They still could do it, but it'd be really late in the campaign. So the stuff that they could have done from a trade perspective, just to clear a roster spot and money, I think that is the biggest direct ripple effect from their decision to keep James Johnson, which again, I thought they would do anyway. But the stuff that's like the small salary dump options the Pacers have, I think if those weren't something they were already strongly considering, now they are certainly strongly considering them to like a higher degree. In fact, I would have almost called it necessary. Now I'd call it really necessary. And this is really boring. And in a lot of ways, it's really sad just because of how the season's gone. But I think the Pacers' most likely trade candidate is James Wiseman, not because they can get value back for him, but just getting his money off their books would be so helpful for the Pacers to be able to do potentially other things on the trade market or just have a roster spot to sign a healthy player or convert a contract or sign 10 days throughout the season, right? And if they were like 99% wanting to do that, now it's like 99.5%, right? Because that's their easiest way to shed money, to have flexibility to do other things. As the season progresses, you never know what's going to come up with other opportunities or injuries or anything. Last year, they converted two-way and signed a new guy. And look at that. Quentin Jackson helped them in the rotation this year, right? You just never know when this stuff will matter. Sometimes you can convert Terry Taylor on the last day of the season. Sometimes you convert an Edmund Sumner. There's just lots of stuff. Sometimes you waive Jalen McHugh and you get O'Shea Brissett on your team, right? Lots of stuff happens after the trade deadline that roster spots make possible. And I know that was a lot of really, really specific circumstances, but if the Pacers want that flexibility this season, the easiest way to get it after James Johnson's contract is guaranteed is probably salary dumping one of their out for the season bigs on an expiring contract. And that's Wiseman and Jackson. And I think that trading James Wiseman is 1,000 trillion times easier because he's on a minimum deal, right? Like it's any team can acquire a minimum deal without sending anything back, right? If you're trading for Isaiah Jackson, you have to match salaries or have a trade exception. It's just way harder. So that is the only real ripple effect to me from this, because the Pacers roster already was what it was, and they clearly planned with James Johnson in mind. They love having him. I think the biggest ripple effect is exactly that the chance of a James Wiseman trade was that I would have considered already somewhat high, probably a little higher now. You know, last year you saw lots of these trades at the deadline. I'm going to reference these a bunch over the next month. Apologies in advance, but like Robin Lopez got salary dumped. He was on a minimum, I think, to Sacramento. There were several more than that. Corey Joseph was a minimum who got salary dumped to the Pacers from the Warriors. The Pacers were over the cap last year, right? Any team that is not over the tax would probably be willing to take in a minimum player in a salary dump. And all it takes with someone on a minimum is either like a crappy pick swap or a really heavily protected second, or just sometimes cash is enough. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But I would say that I already thought that was the most likely Pacers trade, and now I really think that is the most likely Pacers trade between now and February 6th. Good for James Johnson. Like, they very clearly value what he brings to the team, and it's very clearly worth the salary they're paying him for them to have him, because they keep doing it every single year. Obviously, the on-court product is all that fans can really see. I understand why there's opinions about what he provides, but I also understand that the actions speak volumes here, that they keep wanting to have him, and every time they're asked that, I'm like, yes, we love this guy. We want him forever. So good for James Johnson. Pacers, that's settled. Everything we talk about roster-wise for the next month will be trade-specific. Probably doing a trade deadline primer next week with the guest, because January 15th is coming up. Tomorrow, speaking of guests, Jay Rigdon's going to join us, talking about several Pacers topics that I decided to come up with between now and then. Why the team is playing better. Can they keep this up? What would it take to feel really confident in where they are? All sorts of good stuff like that, plus more specifics on certain players. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Back tomorrow with Jay. Then we'll talk Pacers Bulls on Thursday. I'll try to put something together that's a little more unique for Friday. We'll see if it comes together, because I will be out of town. Thank you guys for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Tony R. Reese. His podcast is there at Locked On Pacers, or on Blue Sky. I'm also there at Tony R. Reese. Thank you guys for listening. Have a wonderful day. See ya very soon.